So that speaks volumes about potentially the opportunities that the economy presents as well as the constraints we have. So there couldn't have been a year with greater paradoxes. Companies that have fundamentally built talent have out succeeded, if that's the right word, of companies that have bought talent from outside. So you have to figure out what's the way to build talent. Talent is becoming mobile across companies. The need for companies to have personas of different kinds of employees. One size does not fit all.
So as we look at 2023, whether your organization is in a calendar year or now getting closer to the financial year, we look around, we see our context, interesting globally, the pressures that are mounting, whether the economic, political, the uncertainty at the business level, putting a lot of pressure in organizations, not just at the top line level, but more so at the bottom line and profitability. Somewhere India is in a little different space, and there's a lot of reports that show the silver lining in the economic situation in India and probably the opportunity. What we are going to be doing today and inviting all of our listeners to reflect about how do we take on that opportunity and what are the key trends we need to look at 2023, specifically from a talent perspective. To share insights and perspectives on HR talent trends for leaders in 2023, I have the privilege to be joined by Nitin Sethi, CEO at Aon Consulting, India and South Asia. Very warm welcome, Nitin.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much, and glad to be here with you as well, especially together, physically
and of course,
together.
I think after pandemic, this is like, what a change.
So I want to start with looking back before we look forward. And I think everyone will have a different definition of 2022 because it was a very challenging year in many ways. But if you were to pick up one word that defines 2022 for you, what would that word be and why?
Wow, that's incredible. One word for 2022. I don't think I would have one word for 22. I think the world's gone through significant change over the last 3 years, and multiple things have happened. So, from a point in time post COVID to where we are now, I think when we look back at this decade, 5, 7 years from now, I would call the year of 2022 as a year of paradoxes and constraints. Not VUCA, not BANI, not many of the other new acronyms that are coming through. And I'll tell you why. I think look at how we started the year. Significant opportunity in the words we used: revenge tourism, revenge buying. To by the time we close the year, a bit of caution in the air, global inflation issues. In spite of all of that stuff, India continues to retain some degree of optimism of what the next few years would look like. I think there is certain constraint in the air, but I think largely mid to long term, most Indian leaders are very bullish about where India could be. As much as we started about hiring, there were layoffs at the end of the year. And in spite of inflation, in spite of layoffs, the talent market still remains tight. In fact, we just finished off our salary increase survey, which is quite a benchmark study in this space. And Indian increases are in the range of about 10.5%. So that speaks volumes about, potentially the opportunities that the economy presents as well as the constraints we have. So, there couldn't have been a year with greater paradoxes.
Thank you. Thanks, Nitin. And I love your words, paradoxes and constraints, and how not only it applies at the business level, but also at the talent strategy level. And you've shared some of those examples. What does that mean from a talent operating model perspective? And I think a lot of the operating models were broken even before COVID. What we saw during COVID is, of course, that breaking even further or accelerating. What are some of those operating models from a people and talent perspective that you're seeing emerging to really kind of connect with those two words, paradoxes, but yet constraints?
Yeah, interesting again. The way I would actually answer this question is I think lots of our clients are asking this that, what's the new operating model that they must work under? What has changed? What is new? I would step back and say for hundreds of years now, there has just been one way of working. People came to work, did a variety and a bunch of things. Organizations are built to scale from being 5 in a startup to 100 in a startup to becoming 10,000 at some period of time. At some period of time, productivity was the only mantra to grow. Innovation that was step by step and not, I would call it transformational. I think with everything that's happening in the economy today, fundamentally consumer behavior has changed. How you and I buy stuff has changed. That has implication on talent model, which has implication on, who you hire and who delivers what work. Look at an auto company from being fully on combustion engines to potentially 5, 7, or 10 years from now being fully electric. So what does it mean from a talent perspective? So I think the future talent models would be ones that would be incredibly driven by businesses, very, very, very closely aligned to what business models are. They would just not be one way of operating, from from being regular organizational architectures to sprint models, agile organizations, ones that borrow talent from outside rather than only using internal talent. So I think there'll be many, many new, different kind of talent models that would exist. I think the best organizations would be ones that would use multiple talent infrastructures, organisms to kind of make their story come alive and deliver value to consumers that they actually work with. So I would say that's the way out in the future in terms of where it is. I think the other thing that would change in this whole process is, if you look at organizations, like I said, they were built for processes, and not essentially built around how jobs could be customized to unique skill sets that individuals would bring through. I think going forward, next 3 years, 5 years, and beyond that, I think lots of organizations would have to build jobs that are unique to individuals and their skills and capabilities. And that would, I think, fundamentally alter how organizations structure, pay, reward, attract, hire, what their value propositions are. So I would say a bunch of those things.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Nitin, for that. And as we move from one operating model to a multiple or more creative landscape of operating models, and as I hear you, it's not just you may even have many operating models within the same organization depending on your different business lines. So that layer of creativity for talent leaders to really look at getting closer to what the business really needs and not build operating models for process, but build operating models for, as I hear you, agility and being closer to what the customer really needs. And the other dimension that you mentioned as well is operating models building for the requirements of talent, requirements of talent segments or skills, as you mentioned. And that prompts me to ask you, what are some of those imperatives? Not only just business, but what has changed as well from the talent market perspective, if I may? What else is changing that is also forcing these operating models to adapt?
In fact, for a moment, if I go back to the previous, I think one of the other things that would also change is increasingly the value of a generalist would rise. I think for decades and decades, in global organizations are built on specialists. So you keep getting more and more specialists, keep digging your own trench, and you dig it so deep that you can't look at the trench which is right next to you. I think generalists have this amazing ability to go a little down, then look around and say what else is working, then to be able to link things. So I think that's the other thing. Organizations will have to work through and say that how do I use the value of journalists more, and we're increasingly seeing it across organizations today. Now, coming to your question on talent imperatives, I would say, specifically from an India perspective, I think one thing India will not run short of is capital for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I think India could fundamentally run short of talent to deploy to make businesses successful. Like, it's a very fundamental belief that I have that, companies will run short of people with right skills, with right capabilities, and in right numbers to be able to drive growth, but not necessarily capital. So in that question, from that perspective, I think availability of right talent, availability of right skills. Now, again, if you link the two up, and if you go back 50 years and look at organizations over a period of time through various lens of performance, whether it's how well have they done on markets outside, how well have they done as employers, their ability to hire, remain costs, companies that have fundamentally built talent have out succeeded, if that's the right word, of companies that have bought talent from outside. So you have to figure out what's the way to build talent, what's the way to grow talent. I think the other challenge would also be that, as organizations change, and they'll continue to change, I think no more would you have static models. You would have models that would keep changing because your consumer behaviors are changing. I think your ability to hire talent which has learning ability as an important skill set rather than the core technical skill, I think is going to be important. Then you use that learning agility to keep reskilling and reskilling. I think the other talent imperatives are your value proposition. I think there's a breakdown in what employers define as purpose and what employees see as purpose. That contract seems to be broken. Lots of employees don't align with what employers see as contracts out there. Then there could be many others in terms of reward programs, structures, performance. I would say I would end with saying I think the other big imperative that would make organizations succeed is quality of their leaders and managers. Companies fundamentally need to work on this aspect to be able to improve their ability to hire, retain, deliver better performance, and be able to equip future talent with better skills. So I would say those are big talent imperatives.
Wonderful. And I'm going to pick on some of them to go a little deeper with your permission, Nitin. And one of the things that you just mentioned now was that capital will be available. And the real constraint for growth for organizations will be the ability to be able to attract, retain, those human resources that really are having the skills. And you talked about generalists in principle. Tell us, what does that mean in terms of the way we're going to be looking at employee engagement? And I'm connecting this question with two of your points. One is talent will really be the constraint for growth. And one of your points was also about the value proposition or what employees and employers that is also broken. So where is engagement in all of this? How do we look at engagement differently?
Interesting question again and again. We get asked very often, what do I do to engage talent? We're doing so much for our employees and they don't seem to be happy. And if you look at global data, I think Gallup's a good benchmark in that. Engagement scores over the last 2 years have generally fallen mildly to a great extent across geographies. People don't know what employees really want, and companies are investing, if not hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in different kinds of engagement work, and nothing seems to be working. Now imagine if that was a quantum of money that was available for investments outside, and you could do so much more with it. So I think in many ways it's not going down well and giving you the returns. I think personally, I think I would break engagement up in two things. I would say there are core factors, yeah, and then there is what I call the fashionable stuff to do. I think lots of companies today focus on what I would call is the outer layer, which is I do it because someone else is doing it. Pets to work, coupons for shopping, coupons for spas, bikes and cars when you complete, a few years to a decade working for you. But if you fundamentally go back, why were we always coming to work? We were coming to work because we wanted an identity with a purpose of what the company existed for. We wanted to be happy about the work we're doing, the job that we had. We wanted to continuously learn, grow, and be in a social environment where we can kind of celebrate our achievements with many others. I think the companies that are focusing on the core part of what needs to be done, which is what the job is and how do I enrich the job, how do I make growing not just a vertical growth experience but growing by learning. Yeah, how do I ensure that through my manager and leader I deliver the experience that actually creates excitement at work. How do I make the job good enough that not only for current talent but future talent is excited and engaged about what they do. I think the companies that are succeeding the best in terms of kind of creating highest elements or levels of employee engagement. That's the way I would say. I think that's for every company. You need to identify one, two, or three elements that are core to you. Some could be genuinely really great at providing great job experience. Some could be great at being cradle to grave organizations and genuinely doing that more. So you come in once, you grow over a period of time, accumulate bunch of learnings and experiences and do that. And someone could be good at something else. But companies genuinely need to identify what are those one, two, three, and core, and overwhelmingly focus on them and execute them like the word I would use it, execute it like crazy. And once you do that stuff, believe that even that is something that needs to continuously evolve, and that would happen. Then you pick up the outer layer and pick up things that are best practices, good to do once in a while. Some that outer layer would change. You understand what's market best practice, what are your competitors doing, what's the need of the hour, and do that. And even in those elements, if there is a way to connect it to the core, that's important. The example I would give is last couple of years, the focus on well-being has increased dramatically. Now, well-being could just be one-off well-being initiative, but if we genuinely link it to the element of care, and why an organization believes that they must invest in you for long-term growth, long-term sustainability, then you would get very, very different results. So long answer to a question, but I would say differentiate between the core and the outer layer, invest disproportionately in the core, and it will always give you very different and differentiated results in the long term.
So as I hear you about the importance of focus on what's core, and I love your sentence about execute like crazy. And I think the challenge many organizations may have is that they want to kind of attract all kinds of talent, and they realize that by catering to everyone, then you're really catering to no one. So I think that focus on what's core, what's your core differentiator, and then execute like crazy, it creates an opportunity to clarify to the market, talent market, what you stand for, and hopefully you're able to align the internal processes in the internal layers of employee experience to really what's core. And what I'm keen to understand from your side is, how does that translate then to a reward strategy that aligns once again to that core element? And how do we really look at defining what's core and making sure that that gets translated in the reward strategy? Or there are some elements that you think will anyway be expected and some elements that have to adapt to that core strategy. So tell us a little bit more about guiding principles on reward strategy, and I would love if you can connect it to your previous answer on making sure that it's actually connected to what you think is core.
Yeah. So Esther, I would say interesting question again. The thing in this is, I would say just one guiding principle in this, and that one guiding principle is when you say total rewards, it does not mean cash compensation only. I think that's the place, that lots of companies get lost. Sometimes I go back and reflect and say, how much are we at fault, on this, of always kind of pushing that out and saying, what do increases look like, and cash is the way forward, and what's happening, that the talent in India genuinely wants this. But I would say the only guiding principle is cash is not the only one. There are so many other levers that companies, do or can do or need to operate in. So the framework I would actually work with is to say there are two elements to this. There is transactional and there is relational. Now think of it in a manner that you've got a new offer, and you want to join some place. The salary, I can assure you, at best is something, by the time second, third, fourth month is over and you stop looking at the bank of what you get in, there are lots of other things that would actually excite you to stay there. Like I said, it's about your manager. So companies need to put that element into their rewards framework to say, what is the kind of experience I provide to people who join our teams through their managers and leaders. Yeah, sense of purpose is part of this. Most importantly, the job that you do. What is the job? Are people enjoying the job? How does the job get enriched? People are increasingly saying, if you don't employ me, someone else will, with next set of skills that I want to. So invest in skills and capabilities that people need to. So I would say there are many other levers that companies need to. Again, like the previous response, companies need to, and you can't be hyper good at all of those. So pick up those elements that you can be really really good at, and then differentiate a value proposition. So is it about the, I would say, the kind of learning and the growth that you provide? Is it about kind of benefits programs that you provide? Or are you someone who says that for talent with different kinds of needs and requirements and diversity, you could be a great place to work? So I would say pick up many of those elements. The other thing that companies are also doing is, now they increasingly say that there are different personas of people that come to work. So you don't need to have one approach for all. Identify these different personas, identify their unique needs. There doesn't need to be one to many approach. There can be an approach which actually tells you that, so depending on life stage the talent is, depending on the kind of talent they are, kind of functions they work for, kind of impact they create, there could be different kinds of rewards elements that could coexist in that context. So I would say comp is not the only thing, and one to many is not the only principle. But there are many other levers to pull, build, and create this with as part of total reward strategy.
So on one of the things that probably some of our listeners may be wondering is that, on the one hand, we want to focus on what's core, and I'd love to get your opinion about how do you define core and how do you identify it's a very important decision that you need to take as an organization, and you probably need to stick to it for a long run, because then that's what you have defined as core. And on the other hand, we are also saying that when we look at total rewards, then those touch points need to be consistent, and it's not just cash, as you mentioned. And within all of those touch points, pick up really where your battles, where you want to really become, again, execute as like crazy. So what will be your advice for leaders to really simplify that core and arrive to that one element they really want to put all their energies and execution on? What will be some of the experiences that you can share, maybe with the work you've done with
So
organizations?
there could be different ways to do this. I would say, firstly, you could be in the same sector, but you could have two different elements that identify with you as a company. You could be in infrastructure, and one company could say, hey, it's a lot about, we are a cradle to grave company. Yeah, and you come in as a graduate trainee, and you could retire as managing director of this company someday. Yeah, there could be a company with a very similar proposition who could say it's about global experiences. Yeah, and we could do that. So I think the value proposition depends on each company in terms of where they are. The way I would say is, being the best at one or two does not mean you don't have to do the others. You have to be at base threshold, I would say, around the median of the market, typical practices in terms of what you do in literally just about every area, and then uniquely differentiate yourselves in some of the others. So there are companies, that differentiate themselves in terms of careers, locally, careers globally. There could be companies that differentiate in terms of, you work with us 5, 10, 15 years, and the amount of skills you've accumulated over a period of time makes you a talent somewhere else. There are companies that are known as CEO factories, because of kind of opportunities and growth that they provided, or kind of roles that people do in certain companies, makes them, grow within or outside that ecosystem. So I would say, be at the market threshold in terms of doing baseline good work in most, and in some, just raising the bar to a very, very different level in many of the other places, in some of the other places.
Wonderful, thank you. So if that's kind of like our message, your message, inviting our leaders that are listening to us today for this conversation, and you were to marry that with what are the trends that are emerging in 2023, what are some of the things that you think are opportunities as you look at 2023?
Yeah, opportunities from HR perspective.
Opportunities from an HR perspective, and of course, maybe you can broaden up if you want from a business perspective, but yes, from an HR perspective, I think what you're mentioning is go back to basics, simplify, execute like crazy, which is maybe something you would have told us as well in the past, but continues to be critical. What are some of the other additional trends that you see in 2023 that we need to build into the design mix, if I may, of the talent strategy this year?
Yeah, interesting. So I would say 3 or 4 things. In some ways, I've touched parts of those. I think, one, if you genuinely look at organizations, I think there is mass digitization happening across. It's like how you and I go out and buy experiences and services. And today, let's say a consumer company is not just consumer, but using technology and digital to be able to deliver better experiences, and they need digital talent in that context. So they're competing for same talent with different companies. So I would say the kind of changes and shifts that are happening in org are need to reflect in terms of what's happening back in companies. So in that context, I would say one is, as talent is becoming mobile across companies, the need for companies to have personas of different kinds of employees. One size does not fit all. Yeah, I think that's one big change, and companies that will do this faster and build a wrapper around each persona will find themselves uniquely positioned in the market. The other is, HR functions have usually been built on a more process-driven lever. More CEOs are today frustrated, not by intent of HR, but the fact that when HR comes back and says that either it cannot be done or this is not the way to do it. Now, imagine if, for a consumer company, if there's an opportunity in the market to do this ways, and if the marketing director was to say this is not the way to do it or can't be done, they would lose, millions and billions of opportunities. So I think the need for HR to go out and experiment a bit and do things differently. So I would say, not run things the process way. Personas are different. I think one too many time is gone. When was the last time that you downloaded an app on your phone and had to go through a tutoring or a coaching or a change management lesson in it? I think same applies to HR. When you implement a new process, why should you go through large significant change, training, capability? Do things in a manner that can actually just people live the experience of delivering it. So I would say experience, personas. Yeah, I think I would say those are opportunities.
Sorry, I'm interested to know what does that mean from a talent readiness for the people and work or people and culture teams or HR teams, depending on how we call them. Because what I hear you say is a lot of those are like the business is in a hurry because the customers are in a hurry. Now your internal customers are also demanding that segmentation, that digitization, and your business leaders are demanding that break the processes and experiment more. How ready you see the talent or the HR professionals being, not only at the, love if you can comment on both at the CHRO level, what are some of the skills that have to change or we need to invest in, and even at the middle level. We'd love to understand how ready we are as a community and what are the skills that we need to focus on.
Yeah. So, I would answer that question in two ways. I think my first thing to this is could be slightly controversial. Some people acknowledge, appreciate, and identify the need, and some feel otherwise. I think there is need for more business talent to come into HR. Yeah. The way I would actually say this is, it, many companies move talent between uh, sales and marketing to innovation to something else, etc. Why not HR in that print of things? Why should talent not move, and not just at, and in I would say in the last year or two, as many boards and organizations have realized that talent could be a differentiator in terms of how they build for the future, have put some of the most senior talent out there as chief people officers, and we've seen some of those examples out there. There are examples of CPOs who've gone on to become CEOs of large big companies in that context. So I think there's an opportunity for business talent to come into HR. You don't need to have technical skills. I think what you need is the ability to understand how lack of something or an opportunity to do something with talent could do that, and then you have specialists who do that for you. So I would say that's one thing that HR as a function genuinely needs, more business thing in this. Now, on your question in terms of how ready is HR for the change, I think it's a bit of a change and a painful journey that companies are going through, and for a reason that for years, uh, you know, in our schools, which is B schools and otherwise, we've grown up wanting to do things in a particular manner, and this is the only way to do it. And now there is increasingly a different ask and need from that perspective. So, that pressure of change is not easy to manage and deal with. So, I think, but companies are working. I think increasingly boards and CEOs and business leaders are pushing for that change. I think HR needs to take a little bit more of risk and experiment. Need to understand how does needs to listen in more to the business. I think that would actually do wonders to them. I would equally say HR talent needs to go and sit in the business and do roles out there, which could be sales, marketing, finance, strategy, and do that stuff. Because fundamentally, I think companies that deploy talent as effectively as they deploy capital will actually succeed faster than the others. Like, talent genuinely is the most unique differentiator that could exist for companies.
So specifically for skills that you will advise CHROs to focus on, what if you were to ask you, what are the top 3 skills for CHROs in this coming year? What would those be?
Yeah, I would say not just for the coming year, Esther. I would say one goes back to the previous question. I think CHROs need to see themselves as leaders of the businesses, as part of CEO's team and not just HR. Obviously, they have a responsibility to the talent that they deliver to. So I would say deep business understanding. I think the most successful CHROs that I've seen are ones who intrinsically understand the business they are in, how value gets delivered to customers, and in that context, how does talent get deployed. So I would say deep business understanding. I would say strategic mindset, read, learn, build skills in this area to do that stuff. I would say the other one is design thinking. As companies go through change in their systems, processes, talent architecture, to genuinely understand what that change should be and how should you design it around future principles, future strategy, what talent experience needs to be. I would say design thinking. The last one I would say is, if you're a CHRO of a listed company, I think boards increasingly are paranoid about talent. In that context, CHROs have a responsibility to be able to sometimes step aside from their responsibility of not just working for the CEO or the managing director, but to work closely with the board and advise the board in terms of governance, succession plan, culture, performance. And it's a question of, lots of CHROs would say the board needs to come to me first, but I would say it's not a bad idea for CHROs to step up and say how can they in some form and manner ask for that engagement, because that's one advice that comes often the least, but it's one advice that boards could do a lot of service to, because there is usually credible experience to be able to work through with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Nitin, for that. So I hear you closest to the business, be part of the business. I hear you step up on the strategic mindset, strategic thinking, and design thinking as a new way of looking at execution, and then being the talent sound, not just at the CEO level, but also at the board level. So when I invite you to zoom out and look at what are some of the critical skills for other top leaders within the organization, some of them may be common actually. But now with the context of digitization, with the context of organizations evolving the way we serve our customers, the way we deliver the business, what are the things critical for effective top leaders?
Well, again, I would say there could be a big list of this, but if I were to say of what's working with clients, what do we often hear from CEOs? I would say empathy is big one. Is increasingly, I think that's important for leaders to have. Uh, I would say the other big one is sometimes for leaders, because many of us come with experiences of last 15, 20, 30 years of doing it in a particular manner, is to be persuadable ourselves. I would say that's the other important part of it. Third most important, I think, just learning agility. Just to be continuously at it and know that the skills, capabilities, and experiences that got you here will not work tomorrow. Not just because a book was written by that name, but genuinely because business models and lots of things have changed, and the future will deliver value very differently. So to continuously learn, I think, is a very, very important element or a skill that leaders must have.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nitin, for that. And with your permission, I'm going to now bring some questions from the audience. We had the opportunity to reach out to the audience and inform that we're going to be doing this conversation with you. And we gather some questions for you. And the first one is actually from Ruchi Mago, Global Head HR Shared Services and Talent Acquisition at Orange Business Services. And her question is, when we look at the new generation of talent, how do we understand what they want from their job? And you mentioned that as a very critical component as well. And how should organizations embrace that shift of really providing what the new generations are looking for?
Yeah. No, thanks. And hi, Ruchi. I think the way I would actually answer the question is that I think not just for companies to understand what new talent wants, but for them to be ready to make that change of what a new talent sees as experience. So, what does a new talent want? Some of our research says, I think, a strong alignment with purpose. I think that's critical. And then you have to figure out how do you take that purpose and what their expectations are, communicate it well, and deliver internal systems that actually drive value out of that. I would say the second one is in terms of the job itself. Are they excited about the job, the eventual product that they will relate to? And most talent wants to know that after first couple of years of what they are done or what they will do, what will they do next, and how will the company take them there? Because if you don't, someone else will, and then they will find an opportunity somewhere else will. So I think I would always encourage companies to take a little longer story, not just talk about the current job, but where could you land up over a period of time, and how would you invest in the talent? And I think that could I would personally believe make a bit of a difference.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. There's one more question from CB Thomas, India TA lead at Vodafone. And his question specifically is about emotional connection. And it reads about, with a lot of switching jobs in short timelines, how do we build that emotional connection? Especially connected to your point earlier of the importance of nurturing talent from within. How do we build that emotional connection in the context of many organizations maybe still working hybrid, some of them are still remote, some of them working back in physical spaces, but still that emotional connect seems to be a challenge.
And it's not easy. I think especially in the hybrid world, it was not easy because we've always been used to coming into office and looking at people and colors and something else, and it always meant something for us. And the other way to define this is what culture is and what got people to office. And what was culture? It's a combination of, I would say, rituals, symbols, and beliefs. Now to create that in a hybrid world is very difficult. So I would say one part of this is, and I've been personally, a big advocate of this. I don't think outside of certain jobs that companies can identify and say they could work from home, I think eventually people will come back to work. They need a little bit of that. So companies will have a strategy around whether it's 2 days a week or 4 days a week or three. Increasingly, three is getting more and more popular. But people have to be back at work. I think there is an element of touch, contact, relationship that gets built, and which is important as part of this. The other part is to genuinely invest for the long term. I think what's happened over the last year and a half is companies, you could call it in some places overhired, And the first opportunity where margins came under pressure, went and kind of had to ask people to go. It's difficult to build the brand back in a tough employment market. We're all humans, and you don't forget last set of bad experiences that easily. So I would say, build for the long term, invest in talent, have empathy, and genuinely believe when you hire that people could go the distance with you and communicate that story and vision well.
Wonderful. Can I invite you to comment on the manager experience? How does that take play on that emotional connection? And if you can double click, because you mentioned it before during the conversation, the importance of that experience I have with working with my manager, and how do we really improve that and use that to create emotional connect?
So, bunch of things. I think, firstly, at the most basic level, I think first, the manager's job is never easy. Most of us believe that we've been great at doing what we are, and the only way to grow is to become a manager. And often, when you land up becoming a manager, you need very different sets of skills and capabilities to be able to succeed. So, in that context, I would say the need to invest in what is a good manager, I think, broadly could be very similar, but for each company could be unique. So, I think to say that people skills and people capabilities and managerial skills are important, I think companies need to do that. And then for managers themselves to be able to use those skills, experiences, and capabilities to not just micromanage, but to deliver, get work done through personal experiences, storytelling, and many other things. I can tell you my own thing that I think I had a bunch of managers over the last many years, and if not for them, maybe 20 years later, I still wouldn't be at the same firm that I am. The fact that we had great relationships, great experiences, I learned from them. They knew when to give me the right space and freedom, actually kept me excited and going for the last 20 years.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So my last question is, what will be, now that we have you here, an opportunity to get your word of advice to all of our listeners, and as they listen to this conversation, what would you want to leave them with? And if I may, maybe one thing that we should stop doing as a HR community, and one thing that we should maybe urgently start doing. What would your start and stop be for all of us today?
Interesting. Start. I would say first. I would say stop. I would say stop being risk averse. I would say the world is. You need to experiment. Lots of times you're worried about failures, but when you experiment and you do new things, sometimes even when you fail, you always learn and you become better the next day. So I would say experiment. There is no better time. Organizations, leaders, future business models, everything's changing, and unless you experiment, you won't get better. So stop being risk averse and experiment. What should you do more of? I would say listen more to the business, and they genuinely want you to listen more to them, to deliver and build together with them.
Yeah, well, I think both of them are actually interconnected in many ways. No?
I think so. Yes.
Thank you so much, Nitin, for being with us today, for sharing not only the research at the Aon's level, but also your perspectives and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I enjoyed the discussion too.
Thank you so much. And thanks all of you for joining us for this conversation on top trends for HR Leaders 2023. We look forward meeting you very soon and continue our conversation with all of you. Thank you very much.